Kevin is a veteran of communication of the communication industry and will synthesize and specialize in public relations, strategic communications, planning, and journalism. Kevin has worked as a reporter, anchor, editor, and a news director in radio and television, as well as print reporter and associate newspaper publisher. He recently served as a member of the Transportation and Logistics Infrastructure Task Force for Central New York Subdivision to Governor Cuomo's Upstate Revitalization Initiative, successfully competing for $500 million in economic development funding for this region. Kevin volunteered on the boards of the Syracuse Say Yes Education and the Literacy Coalition of Onondaga County. Today, Kevin's subject and presentation is about the highly challenged inland port project that is being suggested off of Route 481, southbound, across from what we know as the Okra Recycle Facility. Please welcome Kevin Schwab as we learn about the possible new world of Central New York and what it means to us.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is great to see so many people who've turned out today. I think I did this last time, but I want to make sure I do it this time, which is to give thanks to Lewis for putting this series together. I can tell you it is among the most impressive and most valuable of any of the speaker series that we have in this region. And Lewis is relentless in pursuing folks to make sure that that you guys are getting some of the best and most interesting and hopefully most thought-provoking topics that we have here in the community. So Lewis, thank you. And with that, I hope I can live up to the expectations and the high bar that's been set by some of the other speakers that you've had here. A quick question before we get started. How many people have heard about this subject, the inland port opportunity for this region? So just about everybody. Based on what you've heard, without speaking to location for the moment, seriously, how many of you think that the idea is a good idea for Syracuse and Central New York? How many of you think it's a bad idea? Okay. How many of you know of the location that was discussed last fall in the old quarry site that's been more commonly referred to as the Jamesville site? Where? Okay.
Yeah.
It's a quarry.
Jamesville.
So, okay. And how many of you didn't know about that site in particular? A few. Most people know the site. Okay. It's interesting. I will say this and we'll get into this a little bit in the conversation. As you know, the process, or as you may know, the project is in an environmental review phase right now, which requires it to look at multiple sites. And we can talk a little bit about that as we go along. But I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. So with that, let's get started. Let's start with the basics. What's an inland port? And it's, you know, you will find long and complicated definitions to this if you look online. In fact, it's a term that's been changed somewhat over the years. It has a couple of different meanings. Ports on inland waterways have long been referred to as inland ports. But this is not one of those. There's another term for this that's frequently used as well, and it's called a dry port. So what an inland port is essentially an intermodal container transfer facility that's able to handle international trade, both imports and exports. And both pieces of that are very important for lots of reasons. So it's a terminal that can handle intermodal freight, meaning different modes, obviously. Typically, you're thinking about rail and truck when you're talking about this at a dry port. Has a direct, regular connection with a seaport. And it has, very importantly, logistics support capabilities and activities. A lot of people in this conversation speak to the existing site in East Syracuse where CSX has its yard. And a lot of people assume, isn't that already an inland port? And the answer is no, it's not. Because while it fits that first sort of sub-bullet there, it's an intermodal terminal. It is able to take containers off of trains and put containers on trains. And it's able to put them on trucks and take them off of trucks. And it can do a small amount of storage there. But it does not have a regular connection with a seaport. Doesn't mean it couldn't, but it doesn't right now. And it does not have the logistics support capabilities and activities that you would associate with an inland port. And those are some unique capabilities that we're talking about. So import-export, things like customs, secure handling, on-site warehousing, distribution, processing, some potential for light manufacturing associated with the site, and again, that direct connection to a seaport on a regular basis. Container handling, so gantry cranes, straddle cranes, top loaders, right, are part of this. Block container storage, so allowing it to store significantly more in terms of container. And on-site warehousing and even cold storage, right? And a maintenance component is at most inland ports, right? So you think about chassis storage, chassis repair and maintenance, safety inspection, tires, etc. Those are often associated with inland ports that you see around the country. So there's a unique opportunity right now for Central New York, and here's what's driving it. There are a number of factors. First and foremost, we are months away from expansion of the Panama Canal. That is going to allow significantly larger ships to come through the canal than we have seen at any time in its history. We'll touch on that briefly. Late next year, you're going to see important changes in rules regarding trucking. And that will have an impact on this opportunity for us. And we have certain competitive advantages that make this a good location for this kind of a project. We are located right now within a day's drive of nearly a third of the population of the United States and Canada, which puts us in a phenomenal position for a project like this. Right now, there are no true inland ports that are particularly close to us. You will see them in the Mid-Atlantic, you'll see them in the South, you certainly see them in the Midwest, you see them in other parts of the country, but you really have to go to, I guess there's one in Massachusetts that would qualify, but you really don't see it here. Easy access in every direction. Of course, that's something that we have been blessed with here, given the nature of the highways. We have competitive rail service here, which is important as well. We've got a significant concentration of transportation and logistics employment here in the region. Upwards of 13,000 people who are working within our 5-county region who are connected to this industry. We've got significant available storage and warehousing within the region already, and we certainly have the ability to add significantly more. And we are competitively priced in the Northeast in particular. One more big advantage, we're not Houston. You know, it's very funny. This picture is actually from over a year ago when our task force was put together to look at this particular industry as we were preparing for the Upstate Revitalization Initiative and making the case for this industry to be part of our submission to the state. and they had just gone through some torrential flooding that people said, oh, this hadn't had in years and years. And, the reality is this picture now could have been taken last week as well. We are actually the safest region in the nation when it comes to natural disasters. We don't get earthquakes, we don't get big floods, we don't get tornadoes, we don't get this stuff. We get snow and people go, why would you do that? I said, you know what, we know how to get the snow off the roads. And the snow's not stopping the trains either. So we are incredibly well positioned in an environment where business depends more and more on supply chain reliability, and where you see more and more, it seems like anyway, increasing number of these extreme storms and weather events that are happening. I can tell you right now that the folks who are operating that particular facility are not real thrilled. They are, there is enormous amount of damage, enormous amount of disruption for their customers, and it's simply not an issue that we have faced here. As businesses in other parts of the country have had to deal with this, this becomes a key advantage for this region. Going back to that first bullet from a couple of slides ago, Panama Canal expansion, this is pretty simple. The ship on the left, and maybe they don't look as different as you might think, except so you start counting across how wide they are. The ship on the left represents the current largest ships that can get through the Panama Canal. 4,200 TEUs, that's 20-foot equivalent units. Now most of these I think are 40-foot now, but there are still some of the short 20-foot ones out there, but that's the size of the containers basically. The new ships going through are going to be 12,500. That is a huge opportunity. Because what's happened is the larger ships, obviously they're more economical for the shipping companies, and because they can't get through the Panama Canal, what they do right now is go to the West Coast. And things either get trucked across the country or more likely get sent across the country by rail. It takes longer, it's more expensive. And that's great if your destination is closer to the West Coast, but if you're in the middle of the country, certainly if you're in the eastern part of the country, the ideal situation would be to take the ship as close to its destination as possible. So as a result of this, what we're expecting to see is a whole lot more traffic at East Coast ports. And so you've got places like Savannah, Georgia. You've got places like Charleston, South Carolina. You've got places like Norfolk, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, Boston, Port of New York, New Jersey, right? That are all gearing up for what they anticipate will be about a 25% increase in the volume of traffic coming to those ports. And for anybody who's ever been down to Elizabeth, New Jersey and seen the port down there, ain't a lot of room. There's really not to add 25% more volume to what's going through there. So they've got a problem they've got to solve, and it's a good problem. They want that traffic, right? They want to see more goods moving through there, but they've got to figure a way to get those containers out of there in a more efficient fashion. So the answer to that is likely to be rail. Right now, 85% of all the containers that leave out of Port of New York, New Jersey, leave out by truck. And it's costly. It's efficient in some senses in that, if you're trying to get to a close destination, it means that product should be able to get there with relative ease. But getting it out of the port is very difficult and time consuming. And it is not cheap. By the way, all of what comes up to this region, or virtually all of what comes up to this region from that port, comes up by truck. So speaking of trucks, the other factor that we had talked about in driving this opportunity for this region is a rules change that is going to take place on December 11th, 2017. Right now, if you're a truck driver and you are going out on the road, you're carrying your cargo over the road, you're required to keep logs of your trip. There are rules about how long you can be on the road, right? Hours of service rules. And they're important for safety, right? But when you get stuck at the port of New Jersey, you're sitting in Elizabeth, and you get there, you're supposed to be able to pick up your container, and you're number, 57 in line waiting. It certainly messes with your schedule. And I'm not going to say anybody's doing anything improper, but it is certainly understood that, a paper log is not always going to be as accurate in the amount of time that a trucker has been out as an electronic log. That electronic log will be mandated by the end of next year. So if you get stuck waiting, the clock does not stop ticking. That becomes an issue when you think about companies even in this region. For example, Raymore Flint, which has trucks on the road, goes and gets furniture, brings them back up here. Right now, that's a day trip. Right? If you stop and think about that, they get up, they go, they get their materials, they come back. Right? The other issue that you've got is going the other way. So, by the way, if the logs change, if the log rules change on this, what you end up with is the possibility that that's no longer a day trip. And so the cost goes up dramatically and affects our competitiveness in this region in a negative way. So an inland port becomes a way to get ahead of that issue. Because theory, and probably more than in theory, because it should make a lot of sense for them cost-wise, that container would get off of the ship and be put onto a train that would be brought to an inland port here. And the trip from Liverpool is no longer from Liverpool to New Jersey, in fact, but here within the region. So that's one of the key pieces. Here's one of the other pieces that's important to recognize. Even if it's not to this region, there are areas beyond here, for example, that still make that trip in a day. With those trucking rules, you know that's going to change. We essentially allow that day trip to be extended considerably further into the country, because trucks going in and out of there will be able to do so in a much more efficient manner than what they're doing in New Jersey right now. Right? If you don't have to drive all the way to the coast, you can get something to Ohio with ease, for example. Other inland ports. There aren't a ton of true inland ports in the country. There are more than a dozen, but they're not ubiquitous. But we certainly see interest rising because of the very reasons we just talked about. And that's particularly true in the East. Again, I think we have some unique advantages that work in our favor as a region. And we think that there are real job growth opportunities as a result. And we have seen that where there are other inland ports. Let's talk about a couple of those. Virginia Inland Port in Front Royal, Virginia. It was opened in 1990. It's operated by the Virginia Port Authority. It's located near I-81 and I-66. Remember we talked about that north, south, east, west. And it's about 220 miles from the Port of Virginia. It has had a significant economic development impact in its 25 years of life. It's attracted some 39 companies to that area. $747 million in private investment is attributed to that port. And the big number, 8,000 jobs have resulted over his life from that port. It significantly exceeds what they originally expected. Some of the companies that have moved their distribution facilities to that area to be near that port: Home Depot, Kohl's, Cisco, Rite Aid, Family Dollar, on and on and on. And they all have significant employment in that region. South Carolina is a much newer example. Located in the Greenville-Spartanburg area, actually Greer, South Carolina. It opened in 2013. It's operated by the South Carolina Ports Authority. It's located near I-85. And note that it is, 212 miles from the Port of Charleston. By the way, I put those distances in because, again, we talk about our location as an advantage. Yes, sir?
It might be easier to see the screen if we darken the lights, which is the switch by the door.
Ah. 212 miles from the Port of Charleston. I bring up those distances because that has seemed to be an ideal distance for setting up this type of operation, at least in these instances that we think are going to closely resemble what we're talking about here. We are about 200 miles, by the way, from the Port of New Jersey. The economic development impact there, in just a couple of years, they have supported the expansion of a couple of very large manufacturers in their region. With announcements from BMW, where they make all of their BMW SUVs for their global market, that they're adding 800 jobs there, and Michelin adding, with several plants in that region, adding some 500 jobs. Again, this opened just in 2013. This year it is projected to handle some 100,000 containers. That actually doubles where they expected to be at this point in their operations. They thought they would hit that mark about 5 years in. The South Carolina Ports Authority last Thursday announced that they are considering building a second inland port along I-95. Different part of the state, just below the North Carolina border. And one of the things that they were particularly proud of in making the announcement is that jobs related to the port, they did an analysis, are paying some 40% above their statewide average. So those are a couple of case studies. Looking at an inland port for this region, the operator that is proposed and is conducting the environmental review right now is a state authority, as you saw in the other two examples. They have secured some $40 million for this project through regional council funding, another $40 million pledged through the Upstate Revitalization Initiative for projects associated with an inland port. Operations envisioned would work closely with the Port of New York, New Jersey, much as the other two case studies showed a very close and direct link with seaports. In Virginia's case, it is Norfolk. In South Carolina's case, it is Charleston. There are two rail carriers that are serving central New York. CSX and NYS&W have participated in discussions regarding this project, and there are potential sites that could be served by either or both rail carriers. This project anticipates up to one unit train per day. It envisions that it would start with one per week, very similar to the start that South Carolina had just a couple of years ago, for example. Trucks would schedule appointments to gather or deliver containers during the port's hours of operations, which are daytime operations. That's the case with the examples that we've had from these other states, they tend to operate something like a 7 to 6, 7 to 7, somewhere in that range, 7 to 5 in some cases. And some operations would be co-located on the site, others could choose to operate nearby within the region. The location, and I know this is an issue for a lot of folks. The Port Authority of Oswego is reviewing several sites for this process through the State Environmental Quality Review process. In fact, I believe they've reviewed something on the order of about a dozen sites in the region. And that's required by that. A siting study and draft environmental impact statement is being prepared for public review. Look for that sometime next month. The report will address questions that have been raised about the project specifically in terms of siting and impact on traffic, air quality, noise, light, emergency response, and more. These are all required through the secret process. And the report will have to, the draft environmental report will have to speak to that as it ranks the sites. Operational site requirements, and this is important. When people say, well, they looked at, about a dozen sites, how do you pick the sites that you're looking at? Well, you have to figure out what the project requires. What does it need? First and foremost, you need long level rail siding. You need more than a mile, certainly, where you can put siding there. You need close highway access, right? You need to be close to major highways for this to work. You need a large plot of land. I believe it needs to be certainly upwards of 200 acres if you look, for example, at what some of the others have done. And I think that's a significant site requirement. And space for warehousing and distribution facilities for the ability to be located on site. The jobs impact. The estimate that's being put forward is some 2,000 jobs, which is similar to the estimate that was made in Virginia and similar to the estimate that was made in South Carolina. We saw where in Virginia, again, over 25 years, so I'm not going to say it was overnight, they have dramatically outpaced what they thought the site would ultimately produce. The thing that's perhaps most impressive to me is to look at South Carolina. Their situation's a little different because they have a couple of major manufacturers that were looking for this. And so they were ready to go when the site was ready to go, right? And BMW and Michelin, both looking for significant expansion opportunities and both looking for the benefits they could get from this project. That said, I can tell you simply based on the fact that there has been a proposal for this, that there have been inquiries into the region. Tell us where this project stands. And this is from site locators for distribution facilities, very much like the types that we listed when we talked about Virginia. So again, our competitive advantages, the number of jobs that we have concentrated in this region, the fact that we are cost competitive, but these jobs do pay well. In this sector today, the average annual pay for folks working in transportation and logistics is $44,000 a year. That's about 10% above the average for other sectors in this region. And one of the things that we felt is important is these are jobs with low barriers to entry. And low barriers to entry. You don't need to be a PhD to work with us. Right? I mean, we talk about, we looked at what we had put together for the Upstate Revitalization Initiative. I can't tell you how excited I am about the opportunity that we have with drones. Anybody who knows me, I love anything that flies. I think we have the chance to be way out in front of that. And we have some resources to help. But the reality is that there are a lot of engineers that are going to do well with that. A lot of folks with masters and PhDs that are going to do really well with that. But if you want a balanced growth approach, you recognize that most people who live here or anywhere else for that matter aren't walking around with PhDs, and most people aren't engineers. And an economy does not just thrive on one strata of its population. So you need to look at ways to attract jobs that are across the spectrum, good jobs. And we think that this is a type of project that will help us do that. There are certainly benefits here for manufacturers. So we've talked about the ability to attract, but what about folks who are already here? Right now, if you are in this region and you're a manufacturer, you pay a lot of money to export. And believe it or not, if you're sending something to China or to Europe or to South America, quite often the most expensive part of that trip for your product is, remember we talked about almost all of the goods traveling from here to the port of New York, New Jersey go on truck. That's expensive. It's very expensive. And in fact, it's more expensive in many cases than the trip on the ship to get them halfway around the world. So this project has the potential to help our manufacturers be more competitive and grow in a global market because we could significantly reduce their transportation costs when it comes to exports. We could reduce their costs by up to 40%, is what we estimate for a project like this. And if we reduce our costs, we often talk about, the high cost of doing business here. And some of those high costs are, incredibly frustrating. But the reality is costs are costs. If we can reduce some costs in a significant way in this part of their process, there's a chance for them to grow here and a chance to attract even more. So let me close with a couple of thoughts that we included in our submission for the Upstate Revitalization Initiative. Now, this was not about this project in particular, it was about this sector and why it was important to this region. And I will humbly say that I and a few other people, a rationale is supposed to be a short little statement. Why should we do this? Why is this a good idea? So I and a few other folks who were on that work group sat down and sort of wordsmith this, right? Located within 500 miles of over 100 million people, Central New York's transportation and logistics infrastructure sector is well aligned for our region's physical assets. It features industries of unique strength and opportunity for the region, employing more than 13,000 people, and experiencing a net growth in jobs here since 2001. Unfortunately, we can't say that about every industry. With high productivity, higher than average wages for the region, and low barriers to entry. The infrastructure provided by this sector also supports key regional goals as identified by the Regional Council and serves as a platform for every other sector, quite literally moving our economy forward. So that was our simple, hey, here's why we ought to do this. Now, I wrote that with a lot of other folks who are actually in the industry. So they are certainly self-interested. But when we're talking about a platform for other industries, when we're talking about our location and the potential for job growth, we thought it was a strong case. But there are others who seem to think that this is important. There's a huge need and a huge opportunity to get everyone in the world connected, to give everyone a voice and help us transform society for the future. The scale of the technology and infrastructure that must be built is unprecedented. And we believe that this is the most important problem we can focus on. Airline exec, shipping exec, train guy, trucking guy. Who said that? Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. I was particularly taken by that comment. Because he certainly speaks to technology, but he speaks to infrastructure, and he speaks to it in all of its forms, and its vital nature to everything that we need to do going forward. So with that, I'll let Mark have the last word, and I will be thrilled to take your questions, your comments, see how well I can answer any of them. Yes, ma'am.
I am concerned about the huge trucks that I have to deal with when I go over to the Syracuse area, and I'm concerned about that.
Melvin, could you strike the light back up, please? Manny, thank you.
So could you comment on the truck traffic that we'll have to deal with?
Well, it will certainly depend on the site. You know, if you are talking about a unit train, you are talking about 100 and some odd containers a day coming in and out, right? Coming in and then potentially going out as well. You multiply that across a day. Remember, it's by appointment. They're not just all lining up at 7 o'clock in the morning, for example. Assuming easy access to the highway, the impact should not be terribly noticeable. That's part of why you do these things by appointment. All right, a couple of hundred trucks relative to a total, right? Relative to the traffic right now on our interstate highways. And some of these are already, you know, when I give the Raymore and Flanagan example, they're already traveling through the area, right? I mean, the difference, they're just beginning and ending their trip in a different spot, or beginning their trip, right? But they're still coming back to Liverpool. So they're still going right through the area on our highways. So it's not all a net increase either. Yes, sir.
Kevin, on your EAF that was filed with the application, you indicated that there would be 497 containers a day delivered in and out of the port. That's 900 containers, that's 1,000 trucks a day going in and out of the port. Where did you just get the 108?
Let
me finish. That's the first part of it. The second part is, you said you were taking one train, a 497 container train, coming in and out of Syracuse. Each car is 55 feet long, double stacked, it's 250. That's a 2-mile long train. How did you change the EAF that was filed to the numbers that you just presented?
Well, my understanding, by the way, is that the trains could not be 2 miles long. I can certainly check and see. I do not pretend to have that expertise on this, and I want to be very clear. I am not speaking on behalf of the particular applicant for this project, okay? Because they are not speaking until the environmental report comes out. So I don't pretend to have all the details on this, but my understanding is that the train would be over a mile long at its full length, but I've never seen anything that indicates a 2-mile long train. And you know, the issue relative to could it be double stacked? It could be, but the data that I have seen on it does not anticipate that, at least not early in this process. That said, I haven't seen anything that would indicate 1,000 vehicles. Even in what was submitted, they talked about 800 as an absolute maximum, and that, by the way, includes people driving to and from there in their cars. Very much like you see at Excelis in DeWitt. I don't think I don't think we've seen a total disruption as a result.
Well, that was the container count that was submitted by the Port of Oswego.
Yes, sir. Actually, ma'am, I believe you were ahead, and then we'll get to you.
Are there any other areas in this region being considered to be the inland port?
Yes, there are, I believe, about a dozen that are being reviewed.
Do you know any of them?
I do. I am not at a point where I can announce that. It would not be something that I should announce. I think that many of them have already been talked about publicly. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
So-
You, sir, and then you after.
I worked for the trains. One thing to note is if you get a shipload of containers, they aren't all gonna come to Syracuse. They'll go on trains, and then we'll get the business sending trains to the Midwest with these containers. So they're not gonna be all on the local roads, which is a good thing. We still get to handle them. Trains do go 13,000 feet long, but they break them in the yard, and that's how they get them within a mile. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
My question is, your figures are based upon a safe world that doesn't have earthquakes. We've got earthquakes in the south of the West Coast, earthquakes in the north of the West Coast. You know, there could be the whole West Coast could sink 20 miles in, and then where's all that traffic going to go? We've got to be ready for it here, because it's going to be a while before they ever get going.
That's true. We had not factored that in as an opportunity. I like your thinking, though.
Well, it's going to happen.
We could grow
And
up.
they're building what you're talking about 50 miles in from the West Coast, somewhere on the backside of LA or something.
I mean, look, there's no question that you know, we did in fact talk about the fact that we are not prone to natural disasters in this region, and we know that other parts of the country and certainly other parts of the world are. I think, frankly, this region as a safe harbor is a huge advantage for this kind of a project. And again, if we see it take off, for example, the way the folks in South Carolina have seen their inland port, the Greenville, Spartanburg area, take off, you know, they're not even 3 years in to operations on that. And again, last week they announced that they are looking very seriously at whether they want to build a second one.
I'm all for it.
So there's an opportunity there. Yes, sir.
A number of years ago, I was asked to sit in on some meetings that the town of DeWitt concerning this subject. And at the time, there was only one site discussed here, which was the East Syracuse site. And then there was some competition from Buffalo. We actually met with the developers, and there was no mention of another location in this area. And now this Janesville site comes up, and I don't know, where does that stand today?
Well, it's one of the sites that's being reviewed.
I also read actually, not too long ago, that the developer of the East Syracuse site was going to construct a road or two roads from the rail yards and the warehouse right up their Kirkville Road, which would tie into 481 and all the access routes.
That I saw that same report. I can tell you that, you know, there are certainly, it would make sense if that were one of the sites that was under review. It's been talked about, right? And so you would look at, I think, all of the sites that meet those basic criteria that we talked about earlier as those that would be reviewed to see, frankly, what meets the needs and what's the best fit. That's the purpose of doing that kind of a review. Yes, ma'am.
Me?
Yes.
Is it okay if I come up? Just so I can look or something. Thank you. I'm one of the private developers on the Central New York Inland Port that's adjacent and contiguous with the CSX DeWitt Rail Yard. And I want to thank you, Kevin. What a great, compelling information as to why this region needs a Central New York Inland Port. So that information is very compelling. We've been developing that project for a little over 4 years, so I just wanted to give you that update. And recently, 2 weeks ago, Onondaga County submitted a grant for about $92 million of infrastructure improvements to take place on that, and also a Tiger grant for road improvements that would help with the traffic on Kirkville Road, take it off of there, away from the schools, and move it down through the port. And then I just wanted to augment a little bit of your excellent information, and that is that CSX really is, the DeWitt Rail Yard really is an inland port. It's been in existence since 1858. Excuse me. And right now it does receive international containers 6 times a week, but currently they're not serving the Central New York area. And so what we're doing is the state and the county and us as private developers in a public-private partnership relationship are working to get CSX to service that. So the international containers are coming, it's about expanding it, but this is about not a site-specific, this is Kevin's presentation, but I just did want to let you know. And we have held 8 public hearings and open houses, and so watch for some more, and we'd be happy to talk about it again. It was a great presentation, very compelling.
Miss, would you, I don't know who you are, but you know who I am. I know who I am. Okay. Contact me.
Oh, thank
There
you.
might be an opportunity in the fall to address this situation as it moves forward, and it is going to move forward.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.
I believe you had your hand up first, ma'am, and then you, sir.
Just a quick question. From the picture that's there doesn't seem to be any barrier hiding it from the road.
This is not here, by the way. This was, and I specifically did not use one from here because, again, we don't know at this point what the site is. And I want to make that very clear. That's why you have to go through the environmental review process. This was the rendering actually for the South Carolina inland port. And I can go back to show you the actual South Carolina inland port if you'd like to see it. I envision that whatever site is chosen here, that issue would be addressed. We have seen some examples where there are, it's built more like an industrial park, where there are trees, where, you know, access, it's essentially muted from the highway in many respects, or muted from any surrounding properties. As you can see in South Carolina, I don't think they did it as much, but the highway's right here. The train comes right in. There are neighborhoods around, but there are trees that separate the neighborhoods. I mean, there's essentially a neighborhood right across the street, which I think is closer than just about any of the sites that have been discussed here. You know, we have the existing terminal in East Syracuse, though, that's, you know, adjacent to neighborhoods as well. So it does happen. Yes, sir.
Will all these trains go through Jamesville? And if they do, what money is being put forth to make a non-grade crossing that will not tie up the town for long periods of time?
So it's an excellent question, and I think that ultimately speaks to who serves the site. If it is NYS&W, their line comes into this region through Jamesville. You know, that line, I believe that's why Jamesville is where Jamesville is, actually, formed around that line. So it's been there for a very long time. It has served a lot of trains over the years. And if it goes through there, you're looking at, again, at the start, probably a train a week. You know, and at its peak, you're looking at about a train a day in each direction. I mean, let's be fair, right? So we're, you know, right, a train will come to the site, a train would leave the site. So, you know, that's the impact that is anticipated at this point if it's on the NYS&W line. If it is on CSX, then it would use the lines that CSX has through the region. So, which of course go through Syracuse and go, you know, depending on where they go, if it goes to the north, it would cut through Liverpool, for example, which I suspect would have a greater impact, right? You know, one of the sites that's been talked about publicly, people ask about the White Pine site up in Clay, which is on the CSX line. So CSX would come through, and there are at-grade crossings through Liverpool there as well. So we know we have at-grade crossings here in the region, and that there are impacts associated with those, and that's part of certainly what would be studied through the environmental review process. Yes, sir. I'll get back to you, but I want to make sure we get to people who haven't had a chance to speak. Yes, sir.
We all know that the Route 81 through the city of Syracuse is being potentially reviewed as a major project for the next 6 years. Will that impact the potential site at Jamesville?
That's a very good question. I mean, certainly the folks, you know, the engineers are the ones who will have the answer to that, right? As I stand here intuitively, I would say that if you look at something that is located near 481 now, that would seem to be a positive relative to potential I-81 construction. There's a lot of capacity on 481. It would not be directly affected, obviously, the way that something located along 81 would be. But it's an excellent question. I would certainly look for that in the draft environmental statement when it comes out. Yes, ma'am.
Regardless of where this is located, would there be money to improve roads because increased truck traffic will probably damage our roads, and some of our roads aren't in that good condition?
I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that one of the things you look for on a site like this is proximity to the highway, so you don't have that issue, right? You don't want it. You don't want these trucks traveling on a bunch of local streets. I mean, just for the sake of their operations, for the sake of everybody's daily commutes and everything else, right? So proximity to the highway is, I think, certainly going to be a very important factor. It was one of the things that we talked about, and I honestly think that that's an important piece relative to any site. We've certainly heard people talk about concerns with, proximity to neighborhoods and schools and things of that nature. Well, the best way to deal with that is for it not to have to drive by any of them, right? For these simply to have to, quick sort of out of the property and over and onto the highway. I think that's why you see some projects talking about road modifications or things of that nature to try to deal with those issues.
I have a second question.
Sure.
Is the rail system at present sufficient to handle all these larger containers?
Yes.
So there's no question about rail safety?
No. No, I mean, the rail carriers that come into this region, whether it's CSX, NYS&W, Finger Lakes Rail, I mean, they're held to the same standards. So, yes, sir.
Who's driving the boat, Kevin? Who's the...
No boats. Dry port. I'm sorry, I could not resist.
So there's always got to be a sucker in the crowd, right? Okay. But who is driving the project? Who is it? The county government? The state government?
No, the project lead on this is the Port of Oswego Authority.
Will they be the decision maker?
Yes, sir.
Who will be the decision maker if all this goes down without federal money?
It would be the port.
What happens if federal money wants to play into this thing? Or it's required because the Port Authority can't raise that kind of money to get this project off the ground?
Well, as we mentioned, they've raised some $40 million to date, and there's another $40 million designated in the URI. So to give you an idea, the South Carolina Inland Port, built a couple of years ago, was a project that came in under $50 million. So we had several hands up. Yes, sir. I don't believe you've had a chance to speak.
How far down the road is this? I mean, are we talking a couple of years or 10 years or whatever to have this thing built?
Certainly not 10 years. The need's very important, and it's timely because we know that it'll be later this year. We're only a few months from a widened Panama Canal. This is a market-driven opportunity, right? You've got more goods coming in through East Coast ports, or about to be, and they don't have anywhere to put them. They don't have the means to handle them right now efficiently. And so the opportunities to grow inland ports in this environment along, in the eastern U.S. Is vital. If you come to the game too late, have you missed your opportunity?
So are we talking 2 years, 5 years?
Oh, I think my personal opinion on this, it's going to have to be a lot quicker than that. I don't think you certainly can't wait 5 years because they will have figured this problem out, right? The market's not going to sit here and wait for us to twiddle our thumbs in Syracuse.
So has the property been bought?
Or we're still?
Again, the site hasn't even been determined.
So we're talking a few years.
And I hope not. I certainly hope not, because I think if you're looking at, well, we'll have this thing open in 5 years, I genuinely believe that the market will have said, okay, Syracuse, it was nice to know. Yes, sir, in the back.
As a follow-up to General Trump's question as to who's driving the boat, one of my concerns throughout this process has been who actually gets to approve what you do, where you do it, and what that actually looks like on that particular site. So if you come to Manlius, will the people of Manlius have an input into what you do and final decision as to what you do on that particular site? Or if you're going to get us or DeWitt or Cicero, where would you go?
Sure. The answer to that, as I understand it, is, a state authority has the ability to go in and cite, and obviously you have, a hierarchy of governance. And so I would anticipate that they would work with whatever localities are identified in the environmental impact statement. But, just as Upstate University, Upstate Medical University, cites where it wants to cite through its authority as a state entity, I believe that the same holds true for any state authority.
So get Huxley or down here and tell us what they're going to build in our community. That's all.
Yes, ma'am.
Aside from the possibility of job creation, will monies generated from an inland port, wherever it is, will there be money set aside for continual road repair in the future so that we aren't footing the bill for their transportation on and off our roads?
That's a great point. It's again, and I think it speaks to the need for proximity to the highway. I can tell you, trucking companies will tell you they pay a fortune as it is right now in taxes, to cover their impact on highways. But I think it's an absolutely valid point that any particularly local roads that might be affected should have a robust maintenance schedule. And I think that any comments on the environmental impact statement, first of all, you should make sure that is or is not in there. And if it's not in there, I think comments should speak to that. Yes, sir.
This may seem like a facetious question, but
those are my favorite questions.
The market forces that you were talking about envision a continuation of open trade policies, negotiation of trade agreements such as NAFTA and elsewhere, a building of imports and exports, basically in a more or less free trade situation, a manufacturing situation that is similar to exists now, where much is made in China. What if, although it's a small likelihood, what if a certain gentleman was elected president and could actually implement his policies of re-erection of trade barriers and bringing jobs back to America that have been lost to places like China? Would that impact the, not that that's likely, but wouldn't that impact the projections of the number of containers moving in and out of the country over?
It's a really interesting discussion point, and market forces can have all kinds of impacts. I mean, I think one that is far more likely is simply the market cycles in the global economy, right? You certainly hope you're going to hit at a time of growth, right? But what happens if we go into another global recession, or there are all sorts of things that can impact it. One of the things I'd like to think is this gives us an opportunity to affect our local market as it relates to the global market. When we talk about potentially reducing our shipping costs for our manufacturers by more than 40% to exporters, all of a sudden does Fulton Boilers become more competitive and start shipping more of these things around the world, right? All of a sudden, the likes of Inficon or Feldmeyer Equipment, which makes some of the greatest tanks for the pharmaceutical industry anywhere in the world, and they're now into building brewing systems that go into these huge operations. If they can move you know, these big, heavy, fantastic things that we manufacture in this region at a lower cost. I'm hoping that they're going to start selling more of them, and we're going to need more, not less. That's where our market opportunity really is here when we talk about, I mean, that's why I love the South Carolina example. The first people who jumped in and said, we're going to grow because of this, weren't as much as the, you know, the Home Depots and the Family Dollars of the world are great. How about the manufacturers that benefit from this? I mean, logistics is important, and I think it's a good industry. But how about the manufacturers? Michelin saying, we're going to send more tires out around the world because our costs just went down. Or BMW saying, guess what? We're going to be able to ship more SUVs out of South Carolina now because our costs are going down. I'm hoping, you know, Hardin Furniture is going to be in that same boat, right? When we talk about, you know, we tossed that truck in there for a reason. Right? Wouldn't it be nice to see them add 100 jobs? So, yes, sir. I really will get back to you, but I'm going to get to the people who haven't spoken yet. Yes, sir.
What's the radius that you're making the considering site selection, you know, sites?
The Central New York region, so that's the Onondaga and contiguous counties.
Okay.
Yes.
You are absolutely right about the exporting. This is an opportunity for exports in our region, and not just manufacturing, but 3GI, we've really been focusing on our agricultural markets in New York State. And so regardless, and it's really about retaining the importers here so that they don't move to South Carolina as much as we like them, their model. We don't want them to, our manufacturers to go there. We really want to, you know, retain our importers and increase our exporters. So I just want to, just two other things. We were talking about the rail lines. Rail lines are not all born equally. So CSX is a Class 1 railroad, which means that in 1980 there was a Staggers Act that was put in place, and so it put rails into Class 1, 2, and 3. We have a YouTube video that explains it, 3GI-CNYIP, if you're interested. But the Class 1 railroad, CSX, operates on the main line. So it really doesn't go through all the towns, up and down hills, you know, through the valleys. So it goes right from the DeWitt rail yard, straight along the Erie Canal, and then down the Hudson River on what's called the main line. And CSX is the most competitive because it's a Class 1. New York State S&W is a Class 2 railroad, doesn't have that opportunity.
Well, the difference is, I mean, the primary difference between the classes is revenue. Let's be honest.
Okay, so
you're
the classes were decided.
Revenue.
They were decided.
It's absolutely a factual statement.
I will challenge that, sir.
And this notion that they're using different kinds of locomotives, or that they're somehow not safe because they're not Class 1, that's just not accurate. And what's more is this notion of, well, they won't cross through your neighborhood. Again, if CSX goes up to Clay, how are they getting there?
Okay, so not the Clay
right?
side.
Or did I say something wrong? Are they not going to have to go through Liverpool to get there?
Just made a statement that you're talking about one at-ground crossing in Liverpool that can be modified. The Class 1 versus Class 2. The MDA did a complete study on the differences between Class 1 and Class 2. I gave a copy of it to your chair of your subcommittee. A Class 2 railroad has a limit of 25 miles an hour. So to get from New York to here, it's going to take 10 hours. To go through the city of Syracuse, it's limited to 10 miles an hour because it is not a Class 1 track. It's a bolted track versus a welded track. It is not as safe as the other track. And there are distinct differences between the two classes of track. Your committee has been provided that information.
And also, you know, the CSX currently does get international cargo, and CSX also made it very clear to New York State and to our local legislatures that they will service international cargo here at our already existing intermodal facility in DeWitt. and they will only service it at this one location that we've been working on for a little over 4 years now. And then just one more point, thank you, Kevin, is who's driving the boat here and who's making the decision. So, really the governor will make that decision, but we are, 3GI is a private held business, and we have been working with CSX, and we have been working with the state, and we've tried to work with, with this group as well. We're working well on that, but nobody can make our decision for us because, we're moving forward, and we have been, and we have had that in. And then just one more thing. I'm pretty sure that the Port of Oswego, this is a question, and I believe this still stands true, that the Port of Oswego does not have jurisdiction to operate anywhere or make these decisions, and this has been challenged, anywhere outside of their 6-mile radius around there. So that would require state legislation to allow them to operate in Onondaga County. So can you comment on the pushback on that?
I heard this, that is not the legal recommendation that they are operating under. So
But it is the state jurisdiction law.
The interpretation of the existing law does not agree with that, as I understand it. So.
Gotta get pictures.
That's a great point. Stickley, I bet will be one of the biggest beneficiaries. They are obviously a globally known and respected brand.
Truly local.
And truly local. You're exactly right. Well, hardly. We have love for them. They're not that far. They're not that far. But you're exactly right. Next time I'll do that. Thank you very much.
I've been on